Uh, sir, should I start?
Yes,
Hi,
sir, we can
everyone.
begin.
So today we are going to do the analysis of second day of Maharashtra MBA CET, that is on 8th April. So second day, second slot. So overall, it is a fourth slot of CET. So let's have a complete analysis of this. So this is the first what I'm saying, the immediately after exam I'm doing this analysis part. So we'll have a detailed analysis later. So I'll just give a brief idea about how was the overall paper was that, what students feel about it, and what marks a good student can score. So as far as the paper pattern is concerned, there are no changes. Okay. So thankfully, uh, after those 2021, 22 mess up, now the things are smooth. The paper pattern was as they mentioned in their CD bulletin. That is logical reasoning section 75 question, abstract reasoning 25, quantitative aptitude 50 questions, and VARC 50 questions. So total 200 questions, no negative marking, total 150 minutes, five options for each question. You can actually start with any section. There was actually a drop down menu. So from where you can select any section you can start with, and there were no negative marking. Fine. So if I first talk about the technical part, so there were no glitches reported by the students as of now. So exam was smooth for everyone. The interface was very, very good. The only issue the students face, that on right hand side part, almost one fifth of your screen, they show the question numbers. So when they show this question number, you have to scroll the data left, right. Okay. So that consumes a lot of time, but actually you can hide that part. So students who are going to appear for the further slots, you can actually hide that part, so that don't have to scroll that bar left and right. Okay. So that you'll save on that scrolling part. That's what I'll suggest you. So overall experience was good. There was no problem as far as the technical part is concerned. Now, if I want to categorize the difficulty level of the sections, I will say logical reasoning section, easy to moderate. Abstract reasoning, easy to moderate. Quantitative aptitude, easy to moderate. Now, VRC, I will say moderate to difficult, because the vocab and the grammar part, the students who are good at it, they might feel it easy. But students who are not good at vocab or grammar part, they'll find that portion as a difficult part. However, the RC was manageable. That's why I mentioned that as a moderate to difficult part. Fine. However, this opinion will change from person to person based on what is the stronger area. If the stronger area is vocab, this could be easy to moderate part. If the vocab is a weaker area or grammar is a weaker area, then this will be moderate to difficult part. So let me go section by section. I'll give the basic inputs by section by section. So as far as the logical reasoning section was concerned, it was the first section. So before going for that, what could be the ideal order? Now again, that uh, uh, differs from person to person. So what ideally you could have done is that a student could have started with the abstract reasoning section. Now, if you don't waste time on any question, so this should take around 20 minutes. Okay, in 20 minutes, you will be able to attempt around 20 questions. There were certain questions which were tricky, or the logic was not so obvious. You could have skipped those questions or marked something else and you would have went ahead. But around max to max, you will take 25 minutes to solve this section. So that is the first section a student can attempt. That's what I'll suggest. Fine. Then those who have a strong quant area, they could have gone for a con. So approximate time taken could be 35 to 40 minutes for the con section. 35 to 40 minutes for the con section. Then you could have gone for a logical part, or at the end VRC, or reverse way. Somebody who is strong at VRC, they could have gone for a VRC and then a logical reasoning part. So approximate time required for logical reasoning will be around 60 minutes. Fine. And VRC approximately 30-35 minutes. That is a approximate time breakup for these sections as far as the students are suggested. Fine. So the order is again a personal choice, but abstract reasoning usually from the first two slots we got a feedback. It is easy, so you could have gone ahead with that. So let me go ahead with the section by section feedback. So first is the logical reasoning area. Now, logical reasoning area, the best part this year, I'll say, it part was that there were no analytical puzzles. So I call it the best part, because usually the analytical puzzles are time consuming part. So analytical puzzles, in CET used to be set based. So they will give you the one complete information. Based on that, they will ask you the 4 to 5 questions. Sometimes they had asked you the 7 questions in the past also. But this time you find there were no analytical puzzles set based. However, there are question based on linear arrangement. However, there are question based on circular arrangements also. Okay. But these all questions were single question. So as far as the student reported, they reported something around 7 questions were of linear arrangement, okay, of single question, and there was one question of linear arrangement circle, total 7 questions, and one question of whether 2 questions were asked on that data. Fine. So like that, there were around 9 questions on analytical puzzles, but all were individual questions. There were no set based questions. But a problem here that I, when I interacted with the students said that some of the questions, the the information given is not so correct. Means whatever information they have given, with that you're not able to complete the arrangement, and there is no cannot be determined the options. So that happened in 2 to 3 questions. Or when you say A is between B and C, you're actually not supposed to assume that these 3 people are consecutive positions. But if you don't assume that, then the set couldn't have been solved. So that was the situation students reported. Fine. Otherwise, difficulty level was, I'll say, easy to moderate. I'll say easy only. But only thing is certain questions having error. So that was making the students to double check what working they have done. Fine. Let's coming back to the proper analytical puzzles, analytical reasoning part. Analytical reasoning part, number series. Okay, there were no later series or word series. There were number series where questions were there. I think approximately there were 10 questions on number series. Some were straightforward. Some questions you really need to think. Means you have to take a difference, and then difference among the difference you have to take a difference. So certain questions involve those kind of logic. Okay. I didn't notice any analogy questions reported by student, but definitely there were odd man out questions. Okay. So they were odd man out questions in numbers also. There are odd man out questions in the words part also. Then there are questions on symbols and notations. Okay. Coding, decoding, a good amount of questions were there. But only problem was in many cases, look at in coding, decoding, whether your logic is correct or not, to verify that you required some confirmation. So here, many cases, they have given one word, and for that one word, they have given one number. But to verify whether your logic is correct or not, there was no second word given for that. Okay. So there is a problem for a verification part. Otherwise, logic was easy. A good amount of questions were asked on blood relations. Okay. All were easy questions, doable questions. In fact, some of the questions were of the similar nature only. Direction sense, there were few questions, but they had a good variety. This is not a regular type of question. Some of them were so easy that within 30 seconds, 20 seconds, you should be able to answer the question. No input output questions, no questions on clocks, because a CET second slot had an input output question. So everybody was expecting input output questions. No questions on input output, no questions on clocks, no questions on calendars also. I think clocks, there was one question, but I think I'm just confusing whether that question was in logical reasoning or whether that question was an abstract reasoning. But otherwise, there were no questions on calendars, no questions on Venn diagram. Deduction questions, very easy. I think there were only 2 or 3 deduction questions. Both were easy questions. In logical reasoning area, there were 4 data sufficiency questions. But the issue was all those 4 data sufficiency questions were quant based. Okay. Those data sufficiency questions were not so straightforward, slightly tricky. You required a good amount of knowledge of that quant area to solve that question. As far as the student reported, I think out of those 4 questions, 3 questions were based on 2 statement data sufficiency, and one question was based on 3 statement data sufficiency. But there was a good amount of questions on miscellaneous part. So if you're a time student, okay, around 20 questions are on miscellaneous part. If you're a time student, we take one handout called as a miscellaneous. On that, in that handout, a good amount of a good variety of questions has been covered. All those types of questions appeared in this miscellaneous category part. Fine. I think there was one question where the cube was given or the dice was given and opposite to a particular face, which other face opposite to that, that kind of questions were asked. So as far as the difficulty level of this section is concerned, I will say easy to moderate. Few questions, there were errors. Like that, in one question, there were two options were same. The question asked was, which is the odd man out? And the two options were same. So in an odd man out question, if the two options are same, students are confused. Like that, some analytical puzzles, as I said, making that arrangement part, some errors were there. Otherwise, overall difficulty level, what? Easy to moderate. Those who have practiced the all these areas, it's basically the repetition of those practice questions only. They're not a very good variety, something like that, which you never solve these kind of things. There were no such questions like that. Fine. Again, there were no question based on verbal reasoning, no question based on critical reasoning also. So the students who are having the accuracy problem in those areas, they were happy that there were no critical reasoning or verbal reasoning questions were asked. Fine. So that's about your analytical reasoning part. Now, in fact, I just tell you there was one set of 5 questions was asked on alphanumeric series. Again, we counted alphanumeric series in the miscellaneous part only. So those who are planning to appear for the next test, I will suggest you please revise that miscellaneous handout. All those miscellaneous types of questions in a good amount or good quantity were in the paper. Let's go to the next section, abstract reasoning. Now, abstract reasoning section, as far as the section is concerned, there were no surprises. Okay, the familiar types. If you have studied the past papers, you have solved the enough types of questions. Absolutely, there are no surprises in the terms of the types of question. In fact, from the few past papers, 1 or 2 questions were repeated in this section. Now, here, some of the students struggle in counting those number of squares, number of rhombus part. But actually, if you know, if you have studied a permutation and combination, there's a way to count. As they were, I didn't see any question based on number of triangles, but number of rectangles, number of squares, number of rhombus. That counting could have been done using the permutation combination concepts rather than doing the manual counting. That would have saved the time. So those who did the manual counting, you might have wasted some time over there. Otherwise, there were questions were pretty simple. The questions, there were some questions where which says, okay, what will be the water image of this? There's a question based on rotation, question based on series, question based on analogies. Okay, all variety of questions were there, but I did not find any question which you I can say categorically say, okay, very difficult. Okay, probably out of 25, 20 is a good attempt. Probably you can attempt 20, get 20 correct. There were around 3 to 4 questions were there where you would actually think what could be the logic, because the logic is not so obvious in that part. So students could have skipped those questions, could have utilized that time in the other sections, but still easy questions were waiting for you. Fine. Now, Quant part. Now, Quant has mixed reactions, or I'll put it this way. Suppose I'll say you what kind of students you are. If you're a student who are afraid of Quant, you don't get a very good score in Quant, then I will say the section was moderate for you. But students who are good at Quant, or let's say I say they have done the basics of all the topics and they know all the standard types of questions in each section, each of the topic. For them, Quant was an easy area, I will say. Overall, in that out of that 50 questions, the breakup was 40 questions were a pure Quant part, 10 questions were of data interpretation part. So those who are really afraid about the conceptual part of Quant, actually they could have attempted the data interpretation part, because in data interpretation part was easier this time in this particular slot. So if I show the breakup of Quant, this is not fully correct because this is based on the student feedback. We are still collecting the feedback from the student, but this is a slight breakup, and you'll find that most of the questions are in your arithmetic area. Okay, so you see ratio, proportion, variation, 3 questions, percentages, profit and loss, partnership, 2 questions were there, simple interest, compound interest, time and work, good amount of questions were there, 5 questions. Okay, one of the question of time and distance, students said that okay, we tried, the language was not so clear. Okay, means it was based on the pipes and system, but what exactly happening, it was not clear, or whatever answer they calculated was not matching with the answer in the option. Okay, time and distance questions, again I'll say moderate. There were questions based on linear race. There were questions based on train crossing another trains. Okay, these kind of questions were asked in the time and distance area also. Averages questions. There was a question, one question based on the allegation also was there, and mixtures related there was one question was there. Fine. So I'll say con. There were such so many questions. There were so many standard types of questions that were there, so that some of the questions, if you're good at con, you don't need to put your pen on the paper. You could have directly marked the answers without doing a written calculation. Even some of the questions you could have worked on the options to solve them. Some of the questions there are regular shortcut like ages related questions. We know the concept that difference between the age difference between the two people will be always constant. If you apply that concept, many questions you could have solved without making the equations. Okay, so that is a part. If you look at the other areas of quant, simplification, there were two questions, that is board mass based questions. Numbers basics, numbers generally have the higher weightage in quant, and you can see numbers basics 6 and numbers advanced, there were two questions. But numbers advanced means finding the last digit question, but those were very easy questions. Number series as a question was not asked in quant area, but number series questions were present in the reasoning section, or logical reasoning part. Geometry, there was one question. Mensuration, there was one question. Permutation combination, there was one question. Probability, there was one question. Fine. In fact, there was one question based on an identity also, which was if you identify, okay, it is what which formula you have to apply, you could have easily answered that question. So my analysis for the quant is overall, if you're good at quant, it is an easy part. Out of 50, you could have easily attempted 45 questions in around 35 minutes if you're good at quant. But if you're not good at quant, you are average at quant, still you could have selected the questions, okay, and you could have attempted that part. So this way, I'm just, when I said out of 50, you could have attempted 45 means I'm including the DI part also in that part. In the quant section I'm talking about. Fine. As far as the data interpretation is concerned, there was a one question asked on pie chart, one question asked on bar graph. Now, those who are good at percentages, for them, pie chart was the easier set. Those who are good at addition and all that stuff, the bar graph was the easier set for them. But as far as the overall difficulty level is concerned, both the DI sets where I'll categorize as a easy category. I don't want to call them as a moderate also. If I know the basic reading of the graph, I know the basic percentage calculations, I could have got 10 out of 10. In fact, those who are afraid of con are not sure about the topics like averages, allegation, mixtures. They're not sure about accuracy, time and work. They could have actually attempted the DI part and they could have got 10 out of 10 in this DI part. Fine. So both the sets were of the easy category. I suggest out of 50, 45 could be the easy target, probably spending 35 to 45 minutes. Okay. Minimum 35 minutes, maximum 45 minutes. Okay. Now, verbal ability and reading comprehension. Now, here I received a mixed reaction from the students. The students who are good at vocab and grammar, they say the section was easy because whatever part they attempted, that gave them more accuracy. Okay. And they attempted in a lesser amount of time also. However, those who are not sure about that vocab related part, because vocab part or the grammar based part, I will say it was slightly, I'll not say vocab part was difficult. The kind of words they asked was synonyms, antonyms. Okay. They were not the regular kind of words we generally use. They were a very different kind of words. So vocab part students reported definitely difficult. Grammar part, I'll not say difficult, but it was tricky because you many times you have a choice between those two options. Option 3 is also correct, option 4 is also correct. It looks like that. So which is to be chosen? There are many questions based on active voice and passive voice were asked. Idioms based questions were there. Phrase replacement questions were there. Or particular word is given, it is to be replaced by the another word. Those kind of questions were there. Okay. As far as the RC part is concerned, there were total 4 RC passages were asked. Okay. Now, when spoke to the student, they said all the RC passages were the manageable. So I think it was 500 to 600 words was the length. But most of the RC passages questions were the data driven. So you have to read the passage, you have to understand the passage, and from that you are supposed to answer the questions. So in the VRC section, students find the RC more comfortable compared to the VA part. So student did not reported any parajumble questions as such. Okay, but there were definitely questions based on EDMs, active voice, passive voice, fill in the blanks, find the error, then what I'm saying, phrase replacement, idioms based questions. Okay, so all these variety of questions were there in this section. So as far as the overall difficulty of this verbal ability reading comprehension section is concerned, I'll say moderate to difficult. That is what students have reported. Now, considering the overall paper, I will say the overall paper, I'll say easy to moderate category only. In fact, uh, absence of analytical puzzles, absence of analytical puzzles basically saved a lot of time for the students. So that will improve their attempts in the logical reasoning sections. Okay, and probably more than attempts, it is their accuracy will also improve in the logical reasoning sections. But please understand, when you get your final scorecard, there are no marks mentioned. So if this slot is easy for you, your percentile is calculated within the slot only. Okay, so if your particular slot is easy, then to get a particular targeted percentile, the score required will be higher. So I will say a good student who is well prepared, he can easily attempt a genuine attempt of 150 plus. The people who are targeting top colleges, I will suggest then your attempt should have genuine attempt should have been 165 plus. Okay, if you understand, if you are really targeting the top colleges part. So that is the analysis of this overall section. So I don't think any surprises except few questions in logic had errors. That is what student reports, or few questions in logic, particular analytical puzzle, single question. To solve the question, you have to do some certain assumptions. Then only you'll be able to solve those questions. Otherwise, there was no such remarkable thing was there that I should highlight. Okay, this was bad or this was not so good. It is, a student should be happy with this kind of paper, but you have to understand your attempts has to be on a higher side to get a better percentile in such a paper. Because everybody is finding the paper easy, then cutoffs for particular percentile will go on a higher side. So that's all from my side. Thank you. So we are going to post a detailed analysis of this slot. So after a few hours, please watch the detailed analysis also, where we'll try to give a breakup of all the topics accurately. So you'll have a better idea which area had how many questions. And if you have attempted this particular slot, you can also calculate the number of marks on based on that breakup and how many questions you can got correct from that particular slot. So that all from my side. Thank you.